Long before the headlines, before the accusations, before the federal indictment. Jeffrey Epstein was just a math teacher. In the 1970s, he taught at an elite Manhattan prep school despite never graduating college. Within a few years, he transitioned into finance. No one really understood how. There was no record of a traditional Wall Street climb. No clear clients. No visible hedge fund. Yet somehow, he became incredibly rich. Former associates described his business model as secretive, exclusive, and mysterious. He claimed to manage money only for billionaires. No public filings. No investor lists. Just wealth. Lots of it. And influence. By the 1990s, Epstein had cultivated friendships with powerful figures across politics, entertainment, and royalty. Photographs showed him alongside former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Records later revealed flight logs listing dozens of passengers aboard Epstein's private jet, nicknamed by media as the Lolita Express. Another documented associate, Britain's Prince Andrew, business elites, tech founders, Hollywood names, and even future U.S. President Donald Trump, who at one time socialized with Epstein in New York and Florida before reportedly cutting ties years before Epstein's arrest. But among all these relationships, one name appeared more consistently than anyone else. His closest confidant, his alleged recruiter, his fixer, Ghislaine Maxwell, Little St. James, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Palm trees, white sand, turquoise water. To outsiders, it looked like paradise. To accusers, it was something else entirely. Multiple alleged victims later testified that the island was where Epstein's trafficking operation reached its darkest depths. They claimed underage girls were flown there from around the world. Some said they were told powerful men would be present. Others claimed they were paid to perform massages that became sexual encounters. Years later, court documents would allege surveillance cameras existed throughout the compound. Why? Many investigators believed Epstein may have recorded encounters with influential guests. Not for pleasure, for leverage. The scandal nearly surfaced years earlier. In 2005, Florida police began investigating Epstein after a parent reported he had abused her 14-year-old daughter. Detectives uncovered testimony from multiple girls describing nearly identical stories. But when the case reached federal prosecutors, something shocking happened. Instead of a major federal trafficking trial, Epstein received a secret plea deal. The agreement, negotiated with federal prosecutors, allowed him to plead guilty to state charges and serve just 13 months in a county jail. Even more shocking, he was allowed to leave jail 6 days a week for work release. Many victims were never informed of the deal. Years later, the arrangement would become one of the most controversial prosecution decisions in modern American legal history. For years, journalists, lawyers, and victims fought to unseal documents related to Epstein's case. Those documents would eventually become known as the Epstein files. They included flight logs, contact books, court depositions, victim testimonies, sealed affidavits. The files didn't prove everyone named committed crimes, but they revealed something equally explosive: just how many powerful people had crossed paths with Epstein. Some appeared once, some dozens of times, and some had relationships investigators still don't fully understand. In July 2019, federal agents arrested Epstein at Teterboro Airport. This time, prosecutors charged him with federal sex trafficking. Unlike 2008, there would be no secret deal. Authorities raided his Manhattan mansion and reportedly discovered CDs labeled with names and dates, cash, diamonds, thousands of photographs. Investigators believed they had finally built a case strong enough to expose everything. But before trial could begin, something happened. August 10, 2019. Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. Official ruling: suicide by hanging. But almost immediately, doubts exploded across the country. Questions flooded social media. Why were the cameras malfunctioning? Why were guards asleep? Why had he been removed from suicide watch? Even the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Justice launched investigations into the circumstances. To this day, public skepticism remains high, because Epstein's death meant something critical. The man who knew the secrets would never testify. The Epstein files are important not because they prove conspiracies, but because they document connections. They show who met him, who flew with him, who visited his properties, For victims, the files represent unfinished justice. For journalists, they represent unanswered questions. For the public, they represent a mystery still unfolding. When the sealed records began surfacing in courtrooms and newsrooms, investigators realized something chilling. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because the newly released documents didn't just describe crimes. They described a system. Among the most infamous pieces of evidence was a contact directory investigators dubbed the Black Book. It contained hundreds of names, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, foreign officials. Many insisted they barely knew Epstein. Others admitted meeting him socially. A few refused to comment at all. One of the most widely discussed names tied to the files was Virginia Giuffre, a survivor whose testimony became central to multiple civil cases. She claimed she had been trafficked to powerful men while underage. Her statements would later appear in depositions unsealed by federal courts, documents that journalists described as some of the most explosive legal records in decades. As lawsuits piled up, elite legal figures entered the case. One of the most controversial was Alan Dershowitz, a high-profile attorney who had previously represented Epstein. His name appeared in filings related to accuser allegations, which he strongly denied and fought in court for years. The legal battle became a maze of motions, sealed exhibits, and redacted testimonies. To the public, it looked like chaos. To legal analysts, it looked like something else. A war over information. Because whoever controlled the documents controlled the narrative. Another figure who surfaced in investigations was Jean-Luc Brunel. Prosecutors alleged he helped recruit young girls through modeling opportunities and connected them to Epstein's network. Brunel denied wrongdoing for years, but his name repeatedly appeared in testimonies and investigative reports. In 2020, French authorities arrested him. 2 years later, he was found dead in his prison cell in Paris. Official ruling: suicide. For many observers, the pattern felt disturbingly familiar. For decades, court documents tied to Epstein remained hidden from the public. Then one federal judge changed that. Loretta Preska ordered the gradual unsealing of records related to a major defamation case involving Epstein associates. Her rulings triggered waves of document releases, each batch igniting new headlines and speculation. Some files contained minor references. Others revealed sworn testimony. A few included names that had never before appeared publicly. And with every release, the same question echoed across America. Who else knew? One of the biggest mysteries in the entire scandal has never been fully answered. Where did Epstein's fortune really come from? Financial analysts struggled to explain it. He claimed to manage wealth for billionaires. Yet no verified client list was ever made public. No standard hedge fund filings existed. And despite intense scrutiny, investigators never uncovered a traditional financial empire matching his lifestyle. Some former associates suggested he acted as a financial middleman for ultra-rich clients. Others suspected something far more secretive. But officially, the source of his vast wealth remains unclear. At the time of his death, Epstein was being held inside Metropolitan Correctional Center, a federal facility that housed high-profile inmates. Reports later revealed guards failed to check his cell regularly. Surveillance cameras malfunctioned. His cellmate had been transferred. Multiple staff members were later charged with falsifying records. Critics argued the failures were too severe to be simple mistakes. Supporters of the official ruling said incompetence, not conspiracy, explained everything. The truth? Still debated. While Epstein himself would never stand trial, one person did. His longtime associate. His alleged partner in crime. His gatekeeper. In 2021, a federal jury convicted Ghislaine Maxwell on multiple trafficking charges after weeks of testimony from victims and witnesses. Prosecutors described her as the architect who recruited girls, scheduled encounters, and normalized abuse. Defense attorneys argued she was being scapegoated for Epstein's actions. The jury disagreed. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Yet, even after the verdict, questions remained, because the trial focused on her role, not the full network. For years, public interest has centered on one rumored document, a supposed client list. Some believe it exists. Others say it never did. Journalists who reviewed thousands of pages of files say there is no single master list, only scattered references across documents. Still, speculation continues. Because the files revealed something undeniable. Epstein didn't operate in isolation. He operated in circles of power. And history shows that when scandals touch powerful circles, truth often emerges slowly. For nearly a decade after Epstein's first conviction, the story faded from headlines. Most Americans assumed the case was closed, but one reporter refused to let it disappear. Investigative journalist Julie K. Brown from Miami Herald began reviewing thousands of pages of court documents, police files, and victim statements. What she found shocked her. Dozens of victims, corroborating testimonies, and a plea deal that seemed almost impossible to justify. Her 2018 investigative series exposed how the justice system had handled Epstein's earlier case and why it raised serious legal and ethical questions. Within weeks, federal prosecutors reopened the investigation. For many observers, this proved one thing. The Epstein case might have stayed buried forever, if not for persistent journalism. Public attention soon turned to the man who approved Epstein's controversial 2008 plea agreement, Alexander Acosta. At the time of the deal, he was the top federal prosecutor in Miami. Years later, while serving in the presidential cabinet, he faced intense scrutiny over his role. Critics demanded answers. Why was Epstein allowed to avoid federal charges? Why were victims not informed? Why was the agreement sealed? Under mounting pressure, Acosta resigned from his government position in 2019. He maintained that the deal had been the best option available based on evidence and legal risks at the time. But for victims and advocates, the explanation never felt complete. While politicians argued and headlines exploded, one lawyer had been fighting for years on behalf of survivors. Brad Edwards. He represented multiple accusers who claimed they had been abused as minors. Edwards repeatedly stated publicly that Epstein's operation involved more people than had ever been charged. He also warned that some individuals connected to the case held extraordinary influence. His message was consistent. Justice wasn't finished yet. After Epstein's death, a new legal front opened. Authorities in U.S. Virgin Islands, where Epstein owned property, launched their own civil investigation into his financial activities and business entities. Leading that inquiry was Attorney General Denise George. Her office alleged that Epstein used companies registered in the territory to facilitate trafficking operations and move money. Civil lawsuits targeted his estate and financial networks, seeking damages and answers. But in a twist that surprised observers, George was suddenly removed from her position shortly after filing a major lawsuit tied to Epstein's banking relationships. Officials cited administrative reasons. Critics questioned the timing. Several accusers publicly stated they were afraid to testify while Epstein was alive. Some said they feared retaliation. Others claimed they believed powerful figures could protect him. Whether those fears were justified or not, they shaped the case. Legal experts say fear can silence witnesses for years, especially when alleged crimes involve wealthy or influential suspects. And in the Epstein saga, fear was mentioned again and again in sworn statements. By this point, Americans weren't just asking, what did Epstein do? They were asking, how was he able to do it for so long? How did investigations stall? Why were warnings missed? Who ignored red flags? The answers pointed not to a single failure, but to a chain of them. Law enforcement gaps, legal loopholes, institutional blind spots. Individually, they seemed small. Together, they created space for abuse to continue undetected.